with his own weapon, by Harold de Polo. No crocodile tears were shed for Amos Crocker, but a girl in danger is a girl in danger, and men, after all, are men. "I'd like to see you a minute, Witcher," said Crocker ingratiatingly, stopping his car in front of the sheriff's dwelling, just as Bemis stepped out and closed the door behind him. "Make it a short one, Amos," Witcher rather discourteously suggested. "It's almost 4 now, and I aim to get me in an hour or so wading the Stony before dark comes." He paused, wheezed a bit petulantly, and fumbled with the buckle that held the strap of his wicker creel over his shoulder. He put down the aluminum case that protected his 3-ounce split bamboo rod before he satisfactorily adjusted his trout basket. He seemed suddenly to have completely forgotten his broad, if not bald, hint of being in a hurry. "Wish I was as lean as you be, Amos," he complained. "Judas Priest. I got me on the scales down at Dell's store yesterday, 9:48, and I come a heap sight nearer to the 270 mark than I did to 260. I ain't denyin'. Have to try me some of them reduced diets some of them Tony lady summer campers use, I reckon. Do I hanker to slim me down my figure? Yes, sir, Amos, I am gettin' right obese. I calculate the word is I-B." He chuckled as he finished, his great china blue eyes going very wide and the thumb and index finger of his right hand traveling to his huge nether lip with his characteristic gesture. "I just wanted to see you, Witcher," cut in Amos Crocker, rather nervously wetting his lips and blinking behind his silver-rimmed spectacles. "To ask if—" "I know what you want to ask me. Want to ask me where the best troutin' is, now the end of the season's comin' along," interrupted the sheriff with a genial grin. "Shucks, I ain't one of them miserly fellas neither," he went on, pulling out his lip and letting it go back with a hearty plop. "Don't keep the good places for myself. I don't like to share 'em. Yep, Amos, the Stony's the stream this time of year, where I am a-goin' now. Let me get you a rod, and you can traipse up there with me now." He looked at the man behind the wheel eagerly, his eyes shining as they always did when the topic was trouting or birding, or else his stamp collection. "What say?" he cried jovially, as the other hesitated and fidgeted in a search for words. I didn't want to see you about fishing. It so happens, although I certainly know you'd be the man to come to about it," replied Crocker. "I wanted to see you about, well, about my Essie, to tell you the truth. She," Amos Crocker stumbled in his speech, bringing it to a mumbling end with a gulp. He looked appealingly at the sheriff, his eyes a trifle moist, and went on in a choked voice. "Witcher, my Essie's a little gay, a little giddy like a lot of these young ones are today. Oh, no harm in her, I guess, but just careless and all the time talking about wanting to have a good time. Brought her up myself, you know, seeing her mother died when Essie was born." 1. "Well, I've done my best, and it's been a hard job. Took to running up to the lake here in that old flivver I gave her this summer." "Afraid?" "Oh, I am afraid she's been meeting some of those college boys at that camp up near the headwaters. She's only 17, you know, which He stopped rather pitifully with a sigh, biting his thin lips that looked as if they had suffered much from this habit. Witcher Bemis nodded slowly, very slowly and solemnly, and muttered an "aha" that sounded sympathetic. It brought out at least further confidences. "What I am getting at, Witcher," he explained, "is that I am darned worried. And this private worry is mighty hard on a man who's got plenty of it hanging over him in his business. Harbrail ain't what it was in a one-man store, what with all this mail-order business that's sweeping the country. Been in business close to 40 years there in East Chatham than I, but there I go wandering off on my other troubles, don't I?" He wanly smiled, brushing a hand over his forehead. I just wanted to ask you, Witcher, to please maybe speak to Essie for me. Lots of times when a girl won't listen to her father, she'll listen to someone that ain't related. Tell her. Well, tell her to watch her step. Sort of those college boys wouldn't be serious. I am coming to you, Witcher, because every kid in most of the whole county thinks such a heap of you. You seem to kind of have a knack of being chummy with them anyway. I know my Essie's always said how much she likes you, Witcher. He ended up with a quaver this time. Did Amos Crocker? He looked the picture of the usual despairing parent bewailing the actions of a recalcitrant offspring. A sad enough sight, and growing sadder and unquestionably more universal in this hectic era. Yet Bemis, invariably so comforting to everyone under stress, merely opened his eyes wider and stared vaguely at this disturbed father. He remained silent, nodding his head just once, as if intimating that he perfectly understood. You see, Witcher, I am more upset today than usual, I suppose, Crocker went on with a rush. Essie left early this morning, saying she was going to visit Joan Wells down at the landing. I called up there on the phone a couple of hours ago to ask her to stop at Jim Trott's farm on the way home and bring me some corn. She hadn't been to see Joan at all. Witcher. She probably. He gripped the steering wheel as his voice rose and became almost hysterical. She's probably gallivanting off with some of them damn city boys from the colleges, and that's why I came out here to ask you to help a crazy father and try to talk reason into her, Witcher. She's always said how much she liked you, Witcher, he finished with a choking gulp. Always liked Essie Amos, said the sheriff of Noel's Landing with one of his grave nods. Have a talk with her, I will. To Chet, Thomas and Boyce Hutchins always displayed an ingenuity that amounted to positive genius when it came to garnering information concerning Witcher Bemis. This precious pair, anyway, drifted into Dell's store at the landing not 2 hours after the sheriff and Crocker had met, and they were wearing the sleek and satisfied grins that unfailingly brought unease to Witcher's old cronies. They were not kept long in suspense either. Briefly, Chet and Boyce used their time-honored method of attack, the one maligning Bemis and the other defending him until his position was broken down by the laughter of the crowd, and he grudgingly had to admit that he had been wrong. There was a fair-sized gathering there, too, for it was the hour of the evening mail in mid-August. Summer residents were clustered profusely about the window. Anyhow, the crux of the argument was to the effect that it was a downright shame for a fellow like Amos Crocker to bother the sheriff. Wasn't he pestered enough already with having his official duties cut in on his trouting and birding and philately without being worried about looking after frisky young girls? Del Noel and Walt Trowbridge and Jeff Mosby, after the pair had left and the last of the summer people had straggled out, looked at one another and demanded to know how, in the name of sin, Chet and Boyce were able to get hold of their gossip. Witcher, they concluded, must have been making a fool of himself again somehow, and when he himself ambled in some 20 minutes later, they instantly accused him of it. Sure, I calculate I was, boys, he confessed somewhat wearily, his eyes rambling. Seems to me I am always a-making a fool of myself lately. Aye, shucks. I dunno. Perhaps maybe I am getting old. Shouldn't have told Lem Sprague, I suppose. Told Lem Sprague, in unison literally. This trio of old mossbacks cried out the phrase, cried it out in hoarse and horrified accents. Oh, nodded the sheriff. You told Lem Sprague something that was supposed to be private, Dell groaned. And you forgot the first thing he always does is whisper a secret to Chet and Boyce? Chimed in Jeff. Fool's right and old's right, the Lord knows I'll say, was Walt's contribution. I did kind of think Lem might go and talk to Chet and Boyce as a matter of fact, Witcher sadly soliloquized, his hand instinctively going to his lip. Then, the postmaster couldn't put it into words, though not for a moment or so at least. Finally, after he and Jeff and Walt had exchanged more helpless glances, Dell managed to find speech. "Witcher, don't you know you just keep a plan and a plan into the hands of Chet and Boyce? Got a great laugh here this afternoon." They did, and they got a laugh from some of them summer people that are liable to be voters. What with more New York folk claiming residence on account of Maine having low state income tax, said Boyce. Did that when his brother Ned licked you for the office of sheriff, there was another occupation you could take up to make a living at. That same occupation, Witcher, he opined, you'd be acting nursemaid to flighty flappers, like he put it. Damn 'em both. They sure got the laughs, the damn young squirts. Yes, sirree, Bob Witcher, added Walt Trowbridge. There was no cause to give 'em that opening. But Witcher Bemis, his hands on his sides, had thrown back his head and was chuckling, a free and hearty chuckle that graduated into a gale of joyous laughter. Judas Priest, boys, he got out. But didn't Chet and Boyce go and earn a laugh? Lawsy, tickles me it does, thinking of me playing nursemaid. Shucks, fellas, ain't you old-timers got no sense of humor? They didn't seem to have, they most assuredly and decidedly didn't give any evidence of it. With their jaws dropping and their eyes plumb and plain disgusted, the worthy and loyal trio gazed at the man they had championed for years, as if nothing could be said or done. Lugubriously they shook their heads until Jeff, always the most inquisitive, fought to get some sort of reward. "What is all this trouble about Amos Crocker and his gallant essay anyways, Witcher?" he asked. "Couldn't learn no real news from Chet and Boyce." Mr. Bemis laughed again, although this time there was a certain slyness in the sound of it. "Shucks, no, fellas," he stated. "You don't expect me to make the same mistake twice, do you? Made a fool of myself talking to Chet and Boyce, didn't I? Yeah, Dell, gimme my mail, and let me traipse along home." Dell complied grimly, for he and the others knew from long experience that when Witcher Bemis elected to withhold information, nothing in the world could possibly pry it loose from him. 3 Witcher received further information concerning Essie Crocker at an exceedingly early hour the next day. At, to be precise, somewhere pretty close to 3 o'clock in the morning. Amos at that time drove up to the sheriff's house and began wildly to honk his horn. After Bemis had responded, opening the door in his voluminous nightgown, the hardware man from East Chatham unbridled his woe. "It wasn't them damn college boys after all, Witcher," he excitedly wailed. It was them damn road workers. Probably some of that crew that's fixing the road down to Gorham. Always said they look suspicious with their black eyes and polite smiles. Always, thought this foreign labor. He broadened into a rather plausible New England attack on the Latin, then reverting in his nervous condition to the idiom of the backwoods. "Cuss 'em, Witcher, a bad lot they be, and here I been blemmin' my dear little Essie. Frou-frou," he blubbered then, positively blubbered, and before he could master himself, the sheriff had to repeat several times in his soothing voice, "Shucks, Amos, shucks. Get hold of yourself, and come on inside and tell a body about it all." After they were in the house and the gasoline lamp was lighted on the kitchen table with a red and white checked cloth, Amos was prevailed upon to explain more fully. "There it is, Witcher. There it is. Read that cruel message that was slipped under an aching father's door not 2 hours ago in the dead of night." He pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his pocket and savagely flung it on the table. A piece of ruled paper, such as might have been plucked from a school notebook. It bore large printing in pencil that might have been done by a child. Amos Crocker. You love your daughter, and we love money. We have kidnapped her and are holding her as collateral for ransom, unless $10,000 in small bills is placed in Porcupine Cave on Creepy Hollow Mountain before Saturday morning her fate will be worse than death. There is a smart man managing this proposition. We think we should tell you that he is a good American businessman, avenging society." "Gosh," said Witcher when he had read it. "You sure do run into bum luck, eh, Amos?" "Run into it every which way, seems like to me, if it's true." The sheriff stopped abruptly, sheepishly. He flushed and coughed, looking as if he had caught hold of himself before saying something that might embarrass the other man. He fidgeted on his feet, growing more nervous. I, he started. But the hardware man from East Chatham cut in anxiously. "If what is true, Witcher?" "Well, I mean I shouldn't have spoke about it, but I've heard tell. Shucks, you know how gossip is, Amos. But I've heard tell business wasn't so good with you lately, neither. I didn't like to mention it. Slicked out. Didn't." A strange expression akin to eager relief came to the pale eyes behind the thick lenses, and this was also evident from Crocker's voice as he spoke. "It is the truth. Witcher, as I said in the afternoon, hardware ain't what it was. What with this mail-order stuff and all mainly, I have had hard sledding these last couple of years mostly, and great God, Witcher," he added in a wail, "that's what's worrying me so much. I can't scare up any $10,000. Lord, I guess between 2,000 and 3,000 is about my limit." Bemis said nothing. He merely stood there, gazing vacantly at his companion and shaking his head in a saddened way as he clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth in that manner that seems to denote sympathy. Crocker, after a moment, threw his arms wide, rising from his chair. "Witcher, I can't pay that money. They might just as well ask me for $1 million. I am putting myself in your hands. As a father. As a man, I ask you to try and save my little girl. Don't be antagonizing them, though, so that they'll go and do something terrible and desperate to her. 1. Oh, there is no use giving you advice, though," he finished with a wan yet admiring smile, "for I know you are shrewd enough to unravel anything." Mr. Bemis accepted the compliment gravely. His thumb and index finger went to his lip, and as he stared dazedly about the room with his wide eyes, he finally pulled it out and let it go back with a decidedly sharp plop. "Reckon, perhaps, maybe I will be able to unravel this here kidnap mystery," he said slowly. "Work hard at it, at least. I aim to. Funny thing about me, Amos," he smiled whimsically. "Always put up a tougher scrap, I do. When I am fighting for what you might call a political enemy. I mean, you know, a fella that's consistent and gone and voted dead against me. Like to win new votes, I do," he explained simply, "or else put bad things out of the running." Amos Crocker looked so uncomfortable that it was really pathetic, but as the hardware merchant finally found his voice and started to explain, Witcher airily waved for silence. "Shucks, that's all right, Amos. Just speaking about it. I were to impress you, I'd naturally be working hard. And now about them roadmen. Tell me, was Essie?" For an hour, for a good 2 hours, Witcher Bemis sat there, hunched over the table, grilling Amos Crocker with such a mess of stupid, aimless questions that the man from East Chatham was pretty close to a nervous wreck when the thing was over. For kidnapping made quite a stir in that region. It was the first kidnapping the countryside had ever known. The news, too, was scattered far and wide quite early that first morning, for Witcher seemed to have deviated from his usual policy of keeping things dark. Indeed, he was willing to talk about the affair to any chance gossip who happened to come along and ask for information. By doing this, he told everyone he would have more people on the lookout for that poor, dear, innocent little Essie Crocker, who was likely to meet a fate that would be worse than death. But no clues seemed to turn up during the next exceedingly hectic 48 hours for either the sheriff or the dozens of other folk who had busied themselves with the affair. Essie had left home in the flivver at about 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and the last anyone had seen of her was when she had passed a house a few miles out of East Chatham, presumably headed for the Cranberry Lake section. If the car had left the road at any spot, there was no way of telling it by the time the thoroughfare had been examined, for a heavy rain early Tuesday morning would have wiped out all traces of tracks. Bemis, at the insistent instigation of Amos, as well as several others, had investigated the gang of foreign labourers down at Gorham. But from them, he reported, nothing was to be gained. None of their number was missing. None of them had been away from work on Monday. None had seemed at all worthy of suspicion under shrewd cross-examination. Still, and Witcher had slowly cocked an eye in a sinister manner when he had drawled this out, those fellas were a funny breed, all right, and perhaps maybe there were one or two things a backwoods hick had noticed that he meant to foil up. Porcupine Cave, on Creepy Hollow Mountain, needless to state, was also thoroughly looked into. Witcher and several of the best deer men in the region, noted for their wood lore, explored the immediate vicinity with scrupulous care. They fine-tooth combed it so exhaustively that they were able to assure themselves that no human foot had been about the place since that downpour on Tuesday morning. Of this they were certain, although Witcher admitted that there were mighty few things about which one could feel that way in what the poets termed this vale of tears. But on Wednesday or Thursday, whichever it was, it appeared as if some person affiliated with the so-styled Avenging Society had been somewhere in the proximity of Porcupine Cave. At least. Late Thursday night, Amos Crocker paid another of his visits to the sheriff of Noel's Landing. On this occasion, the hardware man showed Bemis the following message. Amos Crocker. Tell everybody to keep away from Porcupine Cave. The next time, they will get hurt. No, not hurt exactly. They just won't know it, for the man who will do the shooting never misses. I guess you ought to know that we're pretty good because the crowd of picked men that looked over the ground weren't able to even find any of our tracks. Yes, we know the woods. We're getting more businesslike now that the time approaches, unless the $10,000 in small bills is placed in the cave by 10 o'clock Saturday morning. God help your daughter. And don't try any funny business. It may be 1, 2, or 3 days before we take the money, but we'll know if it's put there or not. When we get it, we'll free your daughter, if not Avenging Society. As Witcher perused the communication written in the same printed form on the same ruled paper, he actually seemed to pale. He shook his head glumly. By Judas Priest, Amos, he breathed hoarsely. But it sure does look as if these fellas mean what they say. Mean what they say, Crocker almost shrieked, and his hands went to the lapels of the sheriff's worn canvas jacket. He gripped them convulsively and began trying to shake that massive figure in a manner that would have been ludicrous had the situation not been so tragic. Why, Witcher, they're probably one of the most desperate bands of criminals that's ever been let loose on the world. Some branch, it sort of strikes me, of that famous Black Hand, maybe. Why, they'd as soon cut your throat as look at you, from all I hear and read about their kind. Why can't you do something, Witcher? One haven't got any 10,000. I can't even dig up much more than 2, say. God only knows what those brutes will do to my little Essie outside of murdering. He shook the lapels in a frenzy as his voice broke off in a choking gasp and ended up his plea in a mad cry. Oh God, save my Essie. The sheriff of Noel's Landing, with a great sigh, put out his arms and rested his hands on the shoulders of Amos Crocker. He did it gently, as if he were babying a troubled child. Amos, he said very softly, I've did my best. I'm right sorry I've gone and failed. I am, but them damned kidnappers seem to be, well, a mite too slick for me. I got to admit defeat, it looks like, no matter how it'll hurt me in the vote. Well, Amos, there's only one thing I can think of to save your Essie. Witcher stopped, his eyes going very wide as he stared solemnly at the other. What? What's that, Bemis? The hardware merchant wanted to know. Tell you what it is, Amos, elucidated Witcher. We got to give in to them devils, I guess. Well, you ain't got the 10,000 like you say, so I calculate we'll have to make it a sort of family party all around. I mean, Amos, we'll see if the boys in East Chatham and Noel's Landing and Gorham can't go and contribute a measly 10,000 to rescue the daughter of a worthy citizen. Crocker's eyes lit up behind his glasses almost avidly. Then, literally, he fell on Witcher's neck. He blabbered out his gratitude excitedly, and it was a full 5 minutes before the sheriff could sufficiently calm him down and make him understand that he would take over the task of collecting the ransom. 5. The sheriff, in the War of Days, proved himself a canny individual when it came to making tightwads shell out for the Liberty loan. He had probably hung up the best records of anyone in the county, and he had done it from friend and enemy alike. He showed, on Friday morning, that his gift for talking currency away from people had not deserted him. Explicitly, he had got together the $10,000 shortly before the 1 o'clock whistle blew at the East Chatham sawmill. Men had come down handsomely, and even Ira Colton of the First National Bank, who had incidentally a daughter of Essie's age, was reputed to have disgorged precisely 500. And it might be mentioned that Amos Crocker had not been the worthy and beloved citizen that Witcher had told him he was. Indeed, he had always been distressingly unpopular. But a girl in danger is a girl in danger, and men, after all, are men, while Witcher naturally was subjected to numerous caustic comments, in most cases started by Chet Thomas and Boyce Hutchins. A fine sheriff he was. All right, to let a bunch of foreign laborers come up into his bailiwick and kidnap a person and hide her so well that a man who called himself a born woodsman couldn't find her. They quizzed him, though good-naturedly, for there was clean sporting blood in these men of the remote Maine logging country. They gave their money and called it a day. That was all. One or two of them, Ira Colton, the banker, primarily, of course, suggested that Porcupine Cave be watched while the cash was being deposited. But Bemis, as well as Amos Crocker, hastily warned them that any such move might have dire results. Why, they might cut Essie's throat right then and there. Hot-blooded, those foreign fellows, hot-blooded and crazy-brained. It was agreed anyway that the best might as well be made of a bad bargain. The money was given to Witcher, and he placed it in the bank for safekeeping. In the morning, he said, he would roll up in his flivver and procure it, as the cashier had consented to be on the job before 8. After that, the sheriff said, he could drive to the trail that would lead to the stipulated place of deposit on Creepy Hollow Mountain. He would be there, he assured Amos and everyone else, long ahead of the hour set by the kidnappers for payment. Everything, he positively informed the hardware man, was hunky-dory, so much so, in fact, that he absolutely and well-nigh forcefully insisted that the father who was about to regain his daughter go out and celebrate the lucky occasion with him. And with Witcher. What did celebrating mean at this season of the year but traipsing off to the Stony after Trout 6? There was about that fishing one remarkable journey, a thing that had never happened before, and that most indubitably would never happen again. It was the first time that Witcher had ever returned from a trouting trip when the idlers about Dell's store had not crowded close to him to view the luscious catch that he was known to invariably bring back. They had no time to get to him on this occasion before the postmaster himself came up to Bemis and Crocker with palpably wild excitement in his eye. He was holding out an envelope, and his lips were actually quivering so badly that he found it impossible to fashion words. Judas Priest, Dell, drawled the sheriff quizzically. What in all sin's the matter? Win a prize in one of them puzzles you're always right in answers to. But even this ancient and well-known slam at Dell's major hobby failed to elicit any responsive laughs from the native audience. They, as well, were looking quite as tense as the storekeeper. Their eyes, indeed, were glued to that stamped envelope that was being thrust at Bemis with a trembling hand. Stuck in the mail slot. This was Witcher. Dell finally managed to get out. Come across at about 2 o'clock after you'd gone to the Stony with Crocker. Reckon it's some more to do with Essie's kidnapping, by the looks of that there hand that's drawn on the back. Witcher, for a moment, did not accept the proffered letter. Instead, he put his arms akimbo and stood there gazing amusedly at his old crony. He was unquestionably the only calm man there, if that were so. Assuredly, Amos Crocker suddenly became the most nervous one. As he edged his head around Witcher's shoulder and craned his neck forward, he exhibited the most bewildered face it would have been possible to find. He gazed with terror, rapidly taking the place of astonishment at the large and crudely executed black hand that was inked on the back of the envelope Dell was holding. What's it mean?" he gasped, his skin literally turning to that sickly putty color. "Means you should ought to saw me alone about this, Dell, I reckon," replied Bemis somewhat sternly, ignoring Crocker. "I know, Witcher," admitted his friend, "but I've been so damned upset and worried about this here kidnap well, to tell the truth," he finished with a gulp, "I had me a peculiar feeling, I did, that even the 10,000 wouldn't go through." "Just one of my hunches. Like that." The sheriff, however, stopped him with a frown that plainly said Dell shouldn't go on with any such glum talk in the presence of an aching-hearted father. Then, almost brusquely, he reached out and took the letter. "Open it, for God's sake, Bemis, open it!" cried out Amos Crocker, his voice a wild shriek and his face livid. "Aim to Amos," explained Witcher patiently. "After I do my examining, like a good detective should ought to. If the merits of a sleuth depended upon the time he took to scrutinize any suspicious object, Mr. Bemis must indeed have been an admirable one." While Dell and the rest clustered about him with bated breaths and the hardware man fidgeted agonizingly, the sheriff did his stuff. He turned that envelope over and over and over, dozens of times. He held it up to the light and squinted solemnly at it, his great china blue eyes drawn down to mere slits. He surveyed it, in short, from every humanly possible angle, it seemed. And then, just as he was about to slit the letter open, he raised his head and eyed his audience in a sheepish manner. Shucks, he said hesitantly. "Pity this ain't right from Italy herself, huh? Where them black-handers originally growed. Might have got me an Italian stamp for my album, short on. God, Bemis, open it." The man, who now appeared to be all philatelist, however, looked at Amos Crocker with vacant eyes that seemed to intimate his mind was far away. A little crease came to his forehead, as if he were very gravely thinking, and his thumb and index finger strayed to his huge lip. He nursed it quite tenderly, and after stretching it out, he let it go back with a soft plop that brought a friendly laugh from the summer people. "Speaking of the United States, though," he chuckled, "let's open us up this here stamped envelope of that same country, hey, fellas?" He did so, and he proved that he could be generous to the curious by reading the epistle aloud. "Witcher Bemis, since you have seen fit to appoint yourself the manager of the S.E. Crocker kidnapping affair, we are therefore naturally addressing our proposition and ultimatum to you. This avenging society, as it calls itself, is not a legitimate organization. It is composed of 2 or 3 stragglers, all discredited men who have been dismissed from our own society. We have been slightly bothered by them before this, but they have never gone to the cold lengths that they have on the present occasion, nor do we think they ever will again. Anyway, We have stepped in, as soon as our nearest headquarters was informed of the matter, and taken Essie Crocker from their hands and into our own charge. She is with us now. We must mention, Mr. Bamus, that we never deal in such comparatively trifling amounts as $10,000 under any circumstances, $25,000 being our minimum. We are, however, not too greedy. We realize that your community and the surrounding country is not exactly a wealthy one, so we will demand no more than the $25,000 mentioned as our lowest ransom ever quoted. As we know you must collect $15,000 more to make up the amount, we will give you a little grace until 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, precisely. The money, also in small bills, may be placed in the same Porcupine Cave on Creepy Hollow Mountain, already specified by the amateur kidnappers. Unless it is there by that hour, we do not stupidly threaten something that will be worse than death itself. We will kill quickly and mercifully and positively. Black Hand. Chapter of Original Society. Cops, by the way, Mr. Bemis, in order to conclusively prove to you that we are an efficient organization, and also that we know this locality thoroughly, we have captured both Walter Trowbridge and Jefferson Mosby. You had sent them to spy about the vicinity of Porcupine Cave, and, although we acknowledge that they are fine woodsmen, we had no difficulty in taking them completely by surprise and making them our prisoners. They are now safe, having suffered no violence. In the same hiding place where we are keeping Essie Crocker, they too will be freed when the $25,000 is forthcoming, and we believe that you will agree as to our generosity in giving you what may be called this bargain rate. Bache! Oh God! Oh dear God, help! Amos Crocker had yelled this out as Witcher finished, while the others looked on wide-eyed. Walt, and Jeff too, gasped Del Noel after a moment, running a hand over his forehead. Cripes. But my Essie, these men certainly seem to mean calculate. They do mean business, like perhaps maybe you were going to say, interrupted Bemis gravely. Another PA as to the letter there be says, "Save me, father, get the money somehow, they will kill me surely. Essie, here, better see if it's her writing, Amos." But the hardware man had already reached out a trembling hand and pulled the sheet of paper from Witcher's fingers. He stood there, his eyes protruding almost insanely as he stared at the writing. They began to roll. Then, his eyes. They looked so frightened, so puzzled, so filled with unknown terror that it sent a chill along more than one man's spine. He began to shake at the knees presently. A shaking that turned into a convulsive shudder that racked his entire body. His voice, when he cried out, sounded like that of a person awakened from some ghastly nightmare in whose grip he still believes himself to be. Yes, it's Essie's writing, all right. What does it mean? How did she? I mean, my God, Bemis, can't you do something? There was an acute silence as every man there followed Crocker's pitifully appealing gaze at the sheriff of Knowles Landing. The latter, however, was staring up at the ceiling. Into his eyes, too, there came doubt and puzzlement, and he shook his head and spoke dully. I dunno, Amos, I dunno, boys. I am just all up in the air, sort of Essie. And now, Walt and Jeff, 15,000 law, Judas Priest, I'm all up in the air. For sure, I think I'll go and traipse me over home, I do. Use my brain better I can, when I am at home. More comfortable, more. He let his voice trail off, his face dejected and his shoulders sagging as he walked toward the door. Oh God, Witcher, don't leave me. Don't leave me. I am nearly crazy. I am. Let me go with you at least. Bemis silently nodded his head, and with a great sigh the worried father hurried out after him. 7, they sat at the same checked red and white tablecloth in Witcher's kitchen. That is, Bemis did most of the sitting, leaning back in his chair and staring into space as he meditatively nursed his ponderous lip. Amos Crocker, on the other hand, would seat himself for a moment and bound to his feet to pace furiously up and down the floor. Over and over he did this, his face haggard, his fingers nervously plucking at his hair, while the sheriff stolidly stayed silent, looking as if he were miles away. The hardware man once or twice was on the verge of speaking to him, but Witcher appeared to have some telepathic sense that warned him of it, and he would slowly shake his head and tap his forehead with a finger in a manner that plainly said he was thinking and had no desire to be disturbed. At last, however, Crocker could stand it no longer. "I can't bear this awful suspense much longer, Bemis," he quavered. "I tell you it's serious this time. Mighty serious." "Why, it's life or death. They'll kill my Essie, sure we've just got to do something." "'Tis serious at that," agreed the sheriff, although his bearing and his voice were casual, and he kept on gazing at the ceiling. "Got Walt and Jeff in it?" "I did, I guess, having them help me. Ought to feel mean about it, oughtn't I?" "Yes, I suppose you should." "Yes, certainly. They'll meet with the same fate as my Essie, probably if we don't pay them. It's sort of up to you to save them too, Witcher. Man, but it's time to get busy." He spoke somewhat more hopefully this time. Did Amos Crocker a slightly eager light coming into his pale, troubled eyes? Bemis, however, grimly shook his head. "No, Amos, it won't do no good asking people for more money. Sort of like what you call an anticlimax, I guess. Had 'em all pepped up once we did when we got that 10,000 this morning. Coulda had the 25. Then had we known. I reckon. No more, though. No more. That's human nature. Couldn't get the extra 15,000, I'll bet, was the whole of Noel's Landing kidnapped. Got to. But what?" "Only one thing to do, Amos," went on Bemis quietly. "And that's to take the money we already got to Porcupine Cave and see if it'll maybe satisfy 'em. If it does, good. If it don't—" Witcher finished with a shrug and a sigh as he came forward and leaned his elbows on the table. "These people are the real Black Hand, though," wailed Amos. "They mean it when they say they'll murder. Suspected that Avenging Society were a bluffin' Amos, and perhaps this here Black Hand. The Avenging Society was bluffing." Amos Crocker, shaking and livid, leaped over to Witcher. He got his hands on his shoulders, and again he tried to move that great torso back and forth as he poured out his words. "I was the Avenging Society. I was the one who kidnapped my Essie in the first place. I must have been crazy. That was all. Crazy. I was up against the wall with all my creditors after me, and that damn bucket shop down in Boston had stripped me. I knew I couldn't borrow any money. Locally or any other place, I knew I wasn't a popular and worthy citizen. Damn 'em. I thought it was the only way to get some cash to pull myself together with. But that real Black Hand came in. Curse 'em. And I love my girl. She's all I've got, Witcher, and, oh God, man, use your friendship and influence." Witcher Bemis very gently yet firmly put up his hands and took hold of Crocker's wrists, quietly shoving him into a chair, his voice soothed. "Set down, Amos." As the other did so, dazed and trembling, the sheriff reached into a pocket of his worn hunting coat and pulled out a paper. "Know all about it. Amos got a paper here. I drew up a day ago. Tells all the story, more elaborately, of your fake kidnapping. 'Cause it's got Essie's side in it too. Like to have you sign it in front of witnesses. Oh, in front of Jeff and Walt, let's say. Have your Essie back, then you can. Might as well start too." He held up a warning hand as Crocker started to excitedly interrupt. and shook his head fairly sternly. "Ain't aimin' to use this sufession agin ya, Crocker, meanin' I ain't aimin' to prosecute you for endeavourin' to inspire, to procure money under false pretences. Just askin' you twind up your business. I be traipse out o' East Chatham, traipse clean out of the county. Well, ain't never been Caxley a ornament to the community. I calculate for all. Since ain't it'll be the best. Plenty of jobs down Boston way. For a man that knows hardware like a seamter does, he wants to play straight, so. Yes, Bemis, fine. But, Essie, you are sure she's safe? You are sure you are telling the truth? I never knew how I loved her until. Let's go, said Witcher. She's down to waltz with him, Jeff. 8. If Chet, Thomas, and Boyce Hutchins were geniuses at ferreting out information concerning Witcher Bemis, it was likewise true that of late they had developed much efficiency in keeping out of his way after he had handled a case successfully. As the next night was Saturday and Dell's store and post office would be crowded with both natives and summer visitors, the sheriff did not bother to wait until he had his pair of young enemies in the audience. "Used to have a Grammy." "I did, when I were a little shaver." He was drawling out quizzically. "I'll say for the benefit of some of the city folk that ain't heard it," he was drawling out quizzically. She had one of these axioms, one of them proverbs. She used to keep a sayin' to me, "Witcher," she'd say, "I always remember to give a minute regard to detail with an apparent absence of zeal." He had to pause for a moment, for he always seemed to find it necessary to chuckle when he told about his relative. He pulled at his lip before going on, and allowed it to go back with a quiet plop that brought a friendly laugh from the summer people. "Never forgot me that their advice I ain't. So the very first time Amos Crocker come up to me back on Monday it were, I got me mighty suspicious. Called me Witcher. He did when for all the years I'd known him, we'd been Remises and Crocker to one another. Yep, that got me suspicious, though I couldn't say of what. See it right soon? I did, when he brought me that first letter." Witcher was forced to hesitate and smile, then, and rub his hand ruminatively over the fringe of ash-grey hair that circled his otherwise bald pate. One word in that letter was a dead giveaway. No New England word it is mostly, I reckon, and a Maine word, particularly word anyway, that Crocker always used generous words collateral. "Right positive I were. No Italian avenging outfit would write it. Yep. I guess that there false word like you might call it. Come to be about the worst mistake Amos Crocker went and made, folks?" He winked an eye in an intimate manner, then scratched his head. It would be his last chance with most of this city crowd before they left around Labor Day, and it was candidly the business of Mr. Bemis to pull for votes. Certainly, at least, he was getting goodwill and admiration, getting it audibly too, and even slightly vociferously from the younger element. "Of course," he continued, "I had to find out the main thing then, and that was where was Essie. Sort of like that looking for the needle in a haystack. If you ask me, big country around here, like you all know, almighty big, pretty easy for a lone gallant to hide herself off for a spell of 4 or 5 days. Couldn't find no track of the flither. Right simple, you see, to run one into any of them old logging trails. Then that rain coming. Well, no chance to go and discover the car, you might say. But where was Essie hiding? Where would she hide?" He looked almost comical now, as he asked the question with a whimsical grin. Looked indeed as if he were giving a burlesque of a college professor, quizzing his class. "Well," he explained, "I got me a sort of mental card index way in the back of my brain, and I went and mulled over it. Hummed if I were able to drag anything out at first, and then spang bang it hit me hard. See Crocker and his gallon 2 weeks ago Sunday, out ridin' in his car. Passed 'em in the road, to be truthful. Always got my eye out for that minute regard to detail stuff of Grammy's, don't forget. And I remember he'd said they was going on an all-day picnic. Seems I also remember when I got to further fussin' with my mental card index that something had struck me funny that day. Struck me funny it did to see the mess o' food they had with them. Beans, for instance. Why, they must have had 8 or 10 cans. Yep, even though Essie always had liked 'em, I wonder why they was luggin' such a lot. He smiled a bit slyly this time as he paused. Smiled so slyly, so expertly, that he had his audience where he wanted them. They were tense and silent, waiting. Planning the kidnapping then he were, and stocking the place up with food. Where was the place, howsoever, wasn't so hard to figure out, or to make a good stab at leastways. Ought to a hit on it the first day, if I'd been right keen. He'd be liable to go to the spot where he thought there was the least chance of other people going to, and if that old hut up on Mountain Trout Pond wasn't the best bet, may I never cast me another fly. Folks, he chuckled heartily at that, and then his face became grave, as if he had suddenly recollected something. Got to tell some of you more recent summer people that Mountain Trout Pond, up to 5 or 6 years ago, came to be about the best trout water of its kind in the whole state of Maine. Too good it was, so good that she was fished out. Yes, sir, so fished out that I'll bet a man ain't been up there with a rod for the last 5 years. Private place to hide? All right. And when I got Jeff and Walt to go up there yesterday, my hunch that Crocker had chosen it went and proved good deducin', like the detectives would put it. Witcher Bemis yawned and stretched. He spoke casually now, waving a hand. Had to prove he'd went and done this thing, of course, for them letters he'd wrote himself were no real evidence against him. Thought me then, why not use his own weapon, kidnappin'? Anyways, I had Walt and Jeff take Essie down to Walt's place, and then I manufactured that Black Hand business and, well, you all know the rest. May, I am right tired, I be, what with traipsin' all over the country today, returnin' that 10,000 night folks. End of With His Own Weapon by Harold de Polo.